I wouldn't be surprised if you haven't, but OpenAI actually released something next to the real-time API, which I believe is also incredibly cool and powerful, and we will for sure see a lot of utility built on top of it, and it also has the potential of simplifying the technology stack that we are currently using for doing analysis. The feature I'm talking about is called Evals, which basically stands for evaluating model performance. That is the way they define it, and what it does is, as you can imagine by the name, it helps you to evaluate LLMs or OpenAI models. Now, while this is a really theoretical explanation, just imagine that now you can feed in any kind of data that you had from previous chat completions, for example, and you can analyze certain KPIs or information directly inside of this prompt structure to understand what is happening, or if the AI is hallucinating at some points or creating an outcome that you don't expect. Now, while this doesn't sound like anything special, imagine that if you actually have real data inside of your company that is generated by AI, which you probably use through chat completions, where we also come into the realms that I am in, which is voice AI, it becomes incredibly powerful because we can now understand the whole conversation flow programmatically directly inside of API without relying on any other third-party provider that we had to previously install to get insights of what happens actually inside of those conversations. Now, there have been tools like Langfuse that you could install and you can actually analyze every single message and get some data out of it based on whatever you need to further enhance your model and basically reprompt it into a way where you can cover certain use cases and make sure it hallucinates less than your previous prompt, etc. But now with this new feature, even though it isn't better, with this new feature, we have now the potential of actually doing this directly inside of OpenAI. The bad part is, like I mentioned, it's still in beta. We cannot fully use it with APIs because I haven't seen any API reference yet, though you can access it inside of the dashboard. And in today's video, I'm going to give you a rundown of how that looks like, how it works, what you can actually do with it, why I believe it is so powerful, and how you can actually leverage it for your very own company. And not only that, I will also give you access to something extraordinary special that allows you to analyze your voice AI calls directly with OpenAI without you needing to rely on another platform like Langfuse. All of this is going to be completely for free, and if you want to get access to it, simply head over to hub.integraticus.com. You will find the link for that down below in the description. You will find all the templates, everything I share right within this video in there, so you can use it and leverage for your very own business. And with that out of the way, let's head right into it. Now, the first thing I would like to check out with you is the documentation. So obviously we need to go through a little bit of theoretical part for you to understand the whole core concept, because I guess that is the most important thing before showing you the actual details so that it's not too overwhelming. But evaluating model performance, it's like what I said. As you can see, it's in beta. And the main point is basically to have some kind of data set that you can analyze automatically on OpenAI. A data set is nothing else than a collection of information that you have gathered during using a chat completion or an LLM model like OpenAI. This can be both in a conversational way, this can be via voice AI, this can be with other providers, or maybe even not with OpenAI directly, which is also what we're going to come to in a second. But you can just imagine that a data set is just a collection of information that you have gathered through somewhere in the internet or you've created programmatically. Now, this is the most crucial part of this whole setup, because without a dataset, this whole thing is not going to be helpful for you, because obviously you need data in some way. This can be either real data or synthetic data, so AI generated data, but it needs to be some kind of data that you can feed into it. And once you've done that, you will be able to use the eval system inside of OpenAI. Now, the reason I'm on the documentation is mainly because of this part, because OpenAI not only allows you to upload a dataset, but it also allows you to directly leverage chat completions from within the OpenAI platform to generate datasets based out of this. And we look at a technical example here. I promise you, you don't need to create any code. You just need to see what's here on the screen. This is literally all, because all we look at is this little key. So in case you build your very own software, or maybe you use some HTTP modules with make.com to create chat completions, all you need to do is you need to set a new key called store to true, which then starts automatically collecting all of the chat completions that you create using this endpoint or using this setup directly inside of your OpenAI account. And they also added a neat screenshot here, which you can see here, called chat completions, which then again, as you see here, it basically just shows you all of the chat completions that you can then start to evaluate, which is awesome. So imagine that if you don't have a data set which looks something like this, which I'm also going to get into, if you don't have a data set like this, you can literally just start storing your chat completions within the OpenAI dashboard and then leverage that directly for the evaluations. So you don't even need to create those manual datasets, because OpenAI will take care of that. Now, I think this is one of the most important points to understand, that there are many different ways on how you can use evals. And I'm going to explain you today a couple of them, even like how you custom create one of those datasets, which I think is going to be really important if you really want to leverage it. But for now, let's simply head into the OpenAI dashboard, which you can see here. And as you can see, we have the chat completions point over here. I don't have any data right now because I haven't collected it on this project. And usually you would see all of the chat completions here, meaning you can filter them for certain criteria, meaning whatever the output was, what model you've used, a date, metadata, whatever you send along. And you can click then up here on evaluate, which will then load this dataset directly here in the evaluation section. Now this evaluation section is basically the beta feature I'm talking about. This is where we are going to spend our time today to get a proper understanding of how it works, how you can leverage it, and why I believe it's so powerful. Now to actually show you on a real example how that works and why it's so powerful, I'm going to give you access to a Replit template that I created that allows you to extract WAPI calls directly from within your WAPI dashboard and extract them as a dataset completely formatted so that you can literally just import it here to the evaluation section and you can leverage that and make analysis on top of your WAPI calls. Now, like I mentioned, this is completely for free. Simply head over to hub.integraticus.com and download the template, link in the description. Once you click on the link inside of my resource hub, you will see a Replit page that looks like this. All you do is with your account, you click on fork, which will then open a page that looks something like this, where you basically see all of the files on the left and you will see a run button up here. All you need to do to get it started is click on run and you will see a server being set up with a form which looks something like this, which is the WAPI build call dataset. So this is literally a very, very basic application that allows you to just add your WAPI key right here. No worries, it's hosted on your own server that you create on Replit, so there's no need for you to be worried about security of your API key. It's anyways only you who's going to see that one. And all you basically do is you add in your WAPI key right here, and you will basically set a limit for how many of those calls you would like to retrieve from WAPI. The maximum is 100, that is limited by the API. I set it to 10 because it's already enough for testing everything on OpenAI with Evals. And you can basically set up an assistant ID if you would like. Now, once you have your API key, which you by the way find in your WAPI dashboard at the bottom left on your email, and then you go to API keys and you copy your private API key, very important, it needs to be the private one. You simply paste it over here in this field. You set the limit to whatever you'd like. We just go with 10 and you click on fetch data. Now you'll see it's fetching and processing, and if it is ready and it worked out, you will see a button called download process data. You simply click on it and now you see, badum, we downloaded a file called process conversations. And all we do now is simply head over to the evaluations tab inside of the OpenAI platform. And what you do here is you click on create, which opens the sidebar and the whole setup of the chats right here. And since you've downloaded it, all you do is you go here over on import and you click here on upload, and then you upload the file that we literally just created. Now, once the file is uploaded, you will see it here. So you simply click it or select it, and then you can import it. And now look what happens once I click import. You'll see on the left there are a couple of fields being set that are included inside of that dataset that I created for you using this kind of platform that I provided you on Replit. Now, to quickly guide you over, the way I set it up is that I give you access to 6 different kind of data types right here, or data fields, which one is obviously the call type. So you have outbound, inbound, web call. That always depends on obviously what you have set up. Then you also have the cost, which is in cents right here. We have the analysis summary, which is basically the summary of that whole call that you had with the voice agent. Analysis structure would usually contain any kind of KPIs that you track with the structured data inside of WAPI. And we have analysis successful evaluation, which is just an evaluation whether or not the call was successful. And then we have a complete transcript right over here. And this transcript is literally the whole conversation as a text string. And as you can see, the cool thing about the Evals, it basically automatically adds all of those columns as a variable. And those variables we can then use to further enhance or estimate or evaluate that whole data set where we just pushed into it. So the way you can imagine this is that every single row is basically a call that we imported from WAPI. So whatever kind of data you would import here, on one row, you would always have one entry of whatever the data looks like. And I'm also going to tell you why this is important by coming down here. Now, we do have the possibility of generating a new response, which means we can define a system prompt, a message, and then we can generate the next potential response based on the data that we feed in. Now, in this example, since we want to evaluate something, we don't need that, because what's more important for us is actually understanding if things in the transcript, for example, went right, or if the summary is okay, or if the cost is okay, or if the web type fits some specific criteria. But what we obviously are interested in is usually whether or not a transcript has either a book confirmation or if the user has actually been happy. Those kind of criteria is really interesting for us to understand. Now, we could also build out a similar setup directly on WAPI, but for the sake of this video and because OpenAI is most likely going to build it out, which I'm looking very much forward to, because it would simplify our tech stack a lot, and it also helps us to make more granular tests on massive amounts of data with all of those calls that we have created. Now, by actually testing that, all we do is we click over here on Add, which shows you now a really cool list of testing criteria that we can use to analyze the data that we uploaded. Now, you can, for example, check it for factuality, meaning whether or not some data is accurate. In that case, this is exactly why it's important to have different kind of rows. So if we would use a setup like this, what we would need to have some kind of item field that contains a question. It contains the model response separated in a separate column over here, and then some reference with the answer that was expected. Obviously, in my case, we don't have that, so I'm not going to use factuality, because it also doesn't matter for the call analysis. Now, another one that is really important and interesting is the semantic similarity. You can basically compare different values to each other and see how semantically similar they are. Meaning it's not like an equal operator check, so you check if whether this is the exact same as this, but semantically if it's the same. Meaning that if you, for example, have one transcript that you would like to compare to another transcript that you basically A/B test from a voice agent, for example, you can feed in both of those columns in here and compare them to each other and see how they performed based on a semantic similarity search, right? So if you set this to 4, for example, they need to be fairly similar to be passed. And if you set this lower, they don't need to be as similar. So you need to play around with it and actually see what works best for you and what gives you the best results. But that's about the semantic similarity. Now, there are quite a lot more here, but the ones that we are specifically interested in is something like sentiment. We always like to understand how the sentiment of a whole call was. And in that case, what we would do is probably just select the whole transcript, and we would create it with GPT-4o. We set it to positive to see whether or not a call has been positive. I'm gonna click on add here, and now you can see it has been added as testing criteria. Now, another one that we are going to use, which is a more advanced one, which I believe is also one that is really interesting for most of the people, is the custom prompt setup. But before going into that, I just want to briefly touch on the other ones. So string check is basically just a check whether or not a certain column has a certain string or a part of it, so you can compare or check whether or not it mentions something, like booking, for example, or a schedule or a certain property or whatever that is. You can check it against and then get a pass or a fail inside of the evaluation. Then you can also check whether or not the value is JSON or XML. That means if you have retrievals or responses with a JSON or XML format, then match a schema similar to that one but with predefined schemas. Criteria match is basically whether or not any of the data follows a certain structure, meaning if, for example, your conversation is more serious or you want to have more professional, you can check whether or not the criteria matches by asking it, for example, if the conversation is professional here in the criteria field. You can grade that as well with the OpenAI model, and you can select the fields right here and the responses. So in that case, you can see it needs again a conversation and it needs the model response. So you need both of those items inside of the columns to make sure this works. Now, the one that we're interested in, text quality, you can imagine it's very self-explanatory what text quality does. But the one we're interested in is custom prompt, because this allows us to basically define certain values that we can pass through to check whether or not they fail or pass. And what we're going to do for this example, I'm just going to use 4o mini, because that should be enough. And it's usually as well cheaper for doing those evals, because O1 usually takes longer and it's also more expensive. But the goal is that we now, for example, check whether or not a conversation was successful. And what we are going to use this custom prompt for is to check whether or not the customer has been satisfied in those transcripts or not. Now, those are random transcripts. I don't know exactly what's in them, but we will figure that out by just analyzing them. So what I do here is I just write something like, I'll just write a prompt so you can just see it on the screen, probably just going to speed it up a little bit. This is kind of the setup. We basically just want to classify whether or not the user in the following transcript, which is basically what we add from within here, was satisfied or not. And you can also see that I have some asterisks right here, which I'm adding right here as well. That's basically markdown language, which I use for formatting, so the AI understands it a little bit better and gives us better results. That's something you can see as well on my channel in the prompting guides that I released. And down here we have the satisfied value, which I'm also gonna put in some extra characters so we can consider it inline code, which again just makes it easier for the AI to represent and know what to return. And here we can also just emphasize again that we only want to retrieve the values and nothing else. Now, for the grades, it's going to be very simple. What we do is we add 3 grades here, because only one of them is actually going to be pass, which is basically what we will see inside of the evaluation at the end. So I'm gonna set satisfied to pass, and I will set unsatisfied and unclear to fail, because it's nothing we're 100% sure about. And usually it would be the opposite way around, right? You usually don't want to see the successful ones. Maybe you also want that. I mean, it's also important, but in the majority of cases, you want to see which ones actually went false. So let's actually switch to that use case. I think it might be even nicer to see. So satisfied ones we set to fail, and we set unsatisfied and unclear ones to pass, because those are the ones we want to analyze and actually see whether or not they did right or wrong. And all we do then is we click on add right here, and we are good to go. Now, with this data set in place, We can also start estimating the costs right here, which you can do down here. It basically estimates on how many tokens it's going to cost you. You can see it's 81,920 tokens with GPT-4o mini. It is not really expensive. You can see the prices on the OpenAI page. I mean, they always change, but 81,000 tokens isn't too pricey for an evaluation. Yes, this is a small data set, but it is enough for our examples and probably also to give you some understanding of how this whole thing works. So before running, always make sure though to check the prices and the estimates, because if you upload a 100,000 lines document with tons of information, this is going to be a lot more expensive. Alrighty, once we click on run, it will take us to the standard page, and now you will see that it says status waiting right here. Now what happens in the background is that OpenAI is basically going through each and every single row and applying the evaluations that we want to get from those data points. Now, since this can take a while, you will usually get an email from OpenAI that the request or the evaluation is ready. Now what we do is we simply refresh it, because it usually doesn't take too long until it's ready. And you can see right here, it says now succeeded, scores 20%, custom prompt 100%. So by looking into that, you will now see a lot of more details. So these fields are basically the ones that we just imported from the import that we created using the custom replit template. But the interesting ones are the ones here at the end. So you can see we have the sentiment classifier, which currently shows either fail or pass, which means whether or not the sentiment fit into the criteria that we defined, meaning that those messages or those conversations have been positive, while the others have been negative or basically nothing, which would also fail. And the custom prompt is here set to pass, which basically means that in all of those conversations, the customer hasn't been satisfied, which is a bad thing. But in this case, I assume it's probably because it was testing, and in some cases, we don't even have a transcript. So yes, they obviously fail. But if you would have, for example, an actual live agent on the account that you use for retrieving the VAPI data, and you have, for example, bookings, right? And the customer actually makes a booking, and thanks to the assistant at the end, the call ends, you would most likely see something like a false fail right here, because we set it to check actually for the negative ones. Now, obviously the whole match that we have here for past doesn't make sense now, because sentiment, we should have set it to negative to actually check against that. So we could probably compare negative with the actual custom prompt and then see which ones of them passed and basically assign an actual score to it. That just helps us understand how the whole evaluation performed for all of those criteria we defined. But I think for the example, this will do, because it will show you everything that you need to know to understand how this whole setup basically looks like. Now, you can also filter for passed and failed, which is something you can just play around with and get better understanding of it. But the majority of things that you want to be interested in, if you really want to use it, is by setting up the proper evaluation parameters and then checking against it here, whether or not it was successful or it passed or it didn't pass. And you can do this on like a massive set of data and criteria as well that obviously can all be customized to your needs. Now, this is incredibly cool, and I believe it is going to be massively powerful. Like I said, it's still in beta, so there are still a lot of improvements, and I believe we will also soon see an API for that, because I haven't seen it yet. But for now, it is good that you already familiarize yourself with it, because I believe it's going to be a lot more important and advanced in long term. Now, lastly, I would like to explain to you exactly how you can actually create those datasets, because that is a thing that isn't really documented inside of the documentation as of now. I mean, yes, there is information available on how datasets need to be generated in general, but especially for the evaluations, you can upload certain kind of information that is different from what you would usually extract from a dataset, like with the chat completions, for example. And I'm going to show you how I did that, so that you have something like type, cost, analysis, summary, etc. as separate columns right up here. Now, to actually make this work, let's simply assume how a dataset looks in the first place. And for doing that, let's head over to the JSON editor, because it's a very easy one to explain it with. Now, for a dataset, you can imagine that every single line inside of this document is going to be its own data. It's like its own data object that contains certain information about this one row inside of the dataset. Now, this could be something like, if we talk about fruits, this could be something like apple, banana, melon, whatever that looks like, right? So we have on every single line, we have its own kind of data that is independent from the other ones. Now, obviously, this is a simple text example and doesn't matter much, because the way it works is usually JSON. So we usually build out a data set in JSON, and the way it is represented inside of the evaluations of OpenAI is that every single top layer key inside of the JSON is a separate column. And what I mean by that is, let's just set this up right here. We have, for example, the user. Let's say we have, for example, first name, which we're gonna set to Yannis. We're gonna set last name as well, because it's going to be easier to explain for me. And we can also set some more information. Let's say, for example, YouTube handle or something like that. Then we can just add Yannis more. And you get the concept, right? You basically just create a one-dimensional JSON object that just contains a key and a value. And this is also the way how OpenAI structures that. Now, right now you see we have it on multiple lines, which is not what we want. So what we do is we simply click here on this icon, which minifies it and puts it all in one line. Now you can see now that we have the whole dataset available inside of one line in this file. Now, in order to put it into a proper dataset, we simply copy that line a couple of times, as you can see, like here. And now we would have a data set of 7 items. Now let me just customize that. I'm gonna just fast forward that for you. Okay, so I ignore the YouTube handle, but you can see now I just changed the first names and the last names to something custom. And you can also see that now the whole data set looks a little bit different than before, which is great. This is exactly what we want. So now we have a total of 7 data sets with different information. And now all you want to do is you want to copy this information and save it inside of a file that you call something like demo data.jsonl. And it's very important that you use JSON-L at the ending. Now JSON-L stands for nothing else than normal JSON, so what we already know from the format itself, the structured data format. The L kind of stands for line, I guess, or new line. And all this means is that we have now a set of JSON constructs inside of the same file that we can name something like demo data.jsonl, which is then saved and interpreted as a dataset. Now, once you've saved it as an actual file, all we do is we head over to the evaluations tab inside of the OpenAI dashboard, and we simply click up here on create, go to import, and now we upload the file that we just created with this demo dataset that I showed you. Once you've uploaded it, you will see it appearing right here, now called demo_data.jsonl. You select it and you import it, and ta-da, now you will see that you have first name up here with all of the first names, last name, and your YouTube handle. This is the way how you set up a dataset that you can import directly inside of the OpenAI platform. Now, as you can see, this is obviously a very simple setup. The way I set up the whole WAPI export is a little bit different, but obviously it works in a very similar way. You basically create a JSON-L data that is exported, that you can simply import into the evaluations tab and then do your evaluations on top of it. Now, yes, as of now, it is just not as powerful as I'd like to have it for having it in a live setup, especially since it doesn't have a proper API. I guess it's because it's in beta. You can just test it out, you can try, you can get a feeling for it, see how it works, which obviously also helps us to understand how we can later on implement that faster and more efficiently into our current workflows and into our current voice AI structure. I think that's all I have to mention for now. I'd really like to understand what you think of this feature, where you think this is going to be in a couple of months, because I believe it's going to be developed quite a bit more and we will probably see a lot more utility in it, so that we can even get more data out of it, which I believe obviously is going to be really, really important because data is king, we all know that. So I'd really like to understand what your thoughts are on this. Feel free to drop them below in the comments. I'm definitely going to read through them. And that's all I gotta say for now. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you very much for watching. And don't forget, if you would like to have access to those templates, they're inside of my resource hub. Link is in the description. Thank you for watching and see you next time.